I never really imagined the boy I carried for 9 months and raised with every bit of my soul would be the one trying to bury me while I was still breathing. My name's Margaret Wilson, and at 67, I've learned that the people you'd take a bullet for are usually the ones holding the gun. They just forget I'm the one who taught them how to aim. Oh, and before I go on, I'd love to know where you're listening from today. Drop it in the comments, won't you? And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. It's free, and honestly, it really does help us keep making more of these stories for you. All right, now where were we? I built Wilson Enterprises from a tiny desk in a drafty garage into a multi-billion-dollar empire while Alexander was still in diapers. Started in 1982 with nothing but a business degree, $5,000 in savings, and a dream that everyone said was impossible for a single mother. But I made sure my son never knew a day of worry, never felt the sting of poverty I'd grown up with, never had to wonder if the lights would stay on or if there'd be food on the table. I spent 40 years sacrificing sleep, health, relationships, and my whole life so the Wilson name stood for integrity. We manufactured industrial components, the kind of unsexy but essential parts that keep factories running and cities powered. Started with 3 employees in that garage, and by the time Alexander graduated college, we had 15,000 people on the payroll across 12 countries. Only to have my own flesh and blood decide I was just a relic to be tossed away like yesterday's newspaper. It started small, so small I almost convinced myself I was imagining it, like being left off the guest list for the annual charity gala I'd founded 20 years ago to fund scholarships for underprivileged kids. When I asked Alexander about it, he said it was just an oversight, that his assistant must have made a mistake, but his eyes didn't meet mine when he said it. Then came the board meetings where Alexander would talk over me, cutting me off mid-sentence with a patronizing pat on the hand. In front of executives I'd hired, people I'd mentored, he'd say things like, "Mum's a little confused today," or, "Let's table that idea. I think Mum's tired." The worst part, they'd nod sympathetically, like I was some senile old woman who needed to be humoured. I'd built that company from nothing, negotiated deals that saved thousands of jobs, pioneered workplace policies that became industry standards. But suddenly, at 67, I was too old, too confused, too much of a liability. Then came the incident with Victoria, Alexander's wife. She was 32, 23 years younger than my son, a former Instagram influencer who'd pivoted to being a professional wife. I'd tried to like her. I really had. Welcomed her into the family. Gave her a position as head of corporate communications, even though her only qualification was knowing which filter made her look best. At a family dinner, she actually suggested that I might be developing dementia because I'd forgotten the name of her favorite sushi restaurant. I hadn't forgotten. I'd just never cared enough to remember it in the first place. But Alexander jumped on it, said he'd been noticing memory issues too. Maybe I should see a specialist. A specialist for forgetting the name of a sushi restaurant. But it all ended with a text message that broke my heart and lit a fire in its place. I was in my sunroom on a Tuesday morning, the one I'd designed myself when we built this house in 1995. Morning light was hitting the pearls I've worn every day for 30 years, the ones my late husband Thomas gave me on our 10th anniversary before cancer took him. I was reading the Wall Street Journal, checking on our stock price like I did every morning, when my phone buzzed. It was the Wilson family group chat. Alexander had sent a message. For Mum's health and well-being, and for the sake of the family and the company, Victoria and I have made the difficult decision to establish some necessary boundaries. Effective immediately, Mum will be taking a step back from all family functions and company operations. Her recent cognitive decline has become a liability we can no longer ignore, and we believe this is in everyone's best interest, especially hers. I read it 3 times. My hands shaking so hard, the phone nearly slipped from my grip. Then Victoria's reply popped up. "We love you, Margaret," with a heart emoji. "We just want what's best for you. We've found a wonderful assisted living community in Westchester. Very peaceful, very quiet. We hope you'll find the rest you need there." I watched the read receipts appear. My sister Caroline, my brother Robert, Alexander's sister from Thomas's first marriage, Diane. All of them saw it. All of them read it. None of them said a word. Their complicity hung there in that chat, like a thick, suffocating fog. The silence was deafening, more painful than any cruel words could have been. These were people I'd supported through divorces, bankruptcies, addiction. I'd paid for Caroline's rehab twice. I'd bailed Robert out of 3 failed businesses. I'd given Diane a home when her husband left her with nothing, and they couldn't even type 3 words in my defense. That's when I knew this wasn't just about Alexander's ambition or Victoria's greed. This was a coordinated attack, planned and executed, while I'd been foolish enough to believe family meant something. They thought they were dealing with a frail, confused old woman who'd go quietly into that assisted living home and fade away while they divided up my empire. But they didn't realize that for 3 years, I'd been watching every move they made like a hawk circling prey. See, the moment Alexander started pushing me toward the exit, I started noticing things. Little things that didn't add up. The numbers in the quarterly reports that didn't quite match the ledgers. The way the pension fund balance was steadily leaking, drops at a time, like a slow bleed. I noticed the $50,000 Hermes Birkin bags that started appearing in Victoria's closet, the private jet trips to St. Bart's that weren't on the company calendar, but somehow came out of company accounts, the mysterious consulting fees paid to shell corporations that didn't seem to do any actual consulting. Now, Victoria liked to post everything on Instagram. Every vacation, every handbag, every champagne brunch. She'd tag the locations, show off the designer labels, flaunt the lifestyle. And I watched it all, screenshotting, documenting, cross-referencing with our financial records. Those handbags? Each one cost more than most of our factory workers made in a year. And they sure as hell weren't coming from Alexander's salary, generous as it was. I stopped being a mother that morning in the sunroom when I read that text. I became the chairman again, the woman who'd built an empire from nothing, the CEO who'd survived 3 recessions and a hostile takeover attempt in the 90s. And I realized my son hadn't just betrayed me. He'd betrayed thousands of families who depended on Wilson Enterprises for their livelihoods, who trusted us with their retirement funds, who believed in what we stood for, that I could not forgive. I didn't cry that morning. I didn't call Alexander to plead my case or beg for another chance. I didn't respond to that group chat at all. Instead, I walked to my study, locked the door, and opened the secret laptop Alexander didn't know about, the one I'd been using to build my case for the past 3 years. I pulled up spreadsheets documenting every cent he'd stolen to fund Victoria's lifestyle, every fraudulent expense report, every diverted payment, every shell company transaction. I had it all, organized by date, cross-referenced, color-coded, $47 million. That's what they'd taken over. 3 years. $47 million stolen from employee pension funds, from supplier payments, from R&D budgets. Money that should have gone to the people who actually built this company. But I needed more than financial records. I needed something that would destroy them completely. Something so damning they couldn't lawyer their way out of it. That's where Luke came in. My grandson Luke, Alexander's son from his first marriage, was 24 and the only one in the family with a conscience. He'd been working in our operations division, learning the business from the ground up like I'd insisted, despite Alexander wanting to stick him in a made-up executive role. Luke had come to me 6 months earlier, disgusted by what he was seeing. His father's drinking, the way he talked about me behind closed doors, the blatant theft, Victoria's influence turning Alexander into someone Luke didn't recognize anymore. So, Luke became my eyes and ears, my inside man in the coup against me. He filmed Alexander at their penthouse, drunk on 30-year-old scotch that cost more than a car, boasting to his friends about how easy it was to gaslight the old bat into looking senile, how he'd been slipping harmless but disorienting supplements into my tea during family dinners to make me seem confused, how the neurologist he'd insisted I see was a friend of Victoria's, who'd write whatever diagnosis they needed for a price. Luke recorded it all on his phone, sitting in the next room, listening to his father plot to have me declared incompetent so he could take power of attorney and my shares in the company. When Luke brought me that recording, I actually did cry. Not because I was surprised, But because hearing your son discuss your destruction like it's a business transaction does something to your soul that can't be undone. But I didn't have time for grief. I had work to do. I called my oldest friend and my oldest rival, Eleanor Hartwell. We'd competed for 40 years, gone head-to-head on deals, stolen clients from each other, engaged in the kind of corporate warfare that made headlines. She was called the Great White Shark of Wall Street, and she'd earned that name by being absolutely ruthless in business. But we'd also saved each other's companies during the 2008 crash, been there through divorces and deaths, respected each other in a way that transcended competition. We were warriors from the same era, women who'd had to fight twice as hard for half the recognition. "Eleanor," I said when she answered, "it's time to go fishing." There was a pause, then a low chuckle. "I've been waiting 30 years for you to say that, Margaret. What's the target?" "My son," I said, "and I need your help to take him down." We spent 3 weeks in the shadows, operating like the corporate assassins we'd been in our prime. Eleanor started quietly buying up shares from my siblings, the ones who'd stayed silent in that group chat. She approached Caroline first, mentioned that there might be an SEC investigation coming into Wilson Enterprises. Nothing confirmed, of course, but the kind of thing that could freeze assets and make shareholders liable. Caroline, who'd already seen her investment accounts drained by her gambling problem, sold her 8% stake within 48 hours. Robert was easier. Eleanor just offered him 20% over market value, cash, no questions asked. He practically threw the shares at her. Diane took more convincing, but when Luke accidentally sent her a screenshot of Victoria's Instagram showing off a bracelet that had belonged to Diane's late mother, a family heirloom that was supposed to have been lost, she sold her shares out of pure fury. Between Eleanor's purchases and the shares I still controlled, we quietly accumulated 51% of the company, majority control, the nuclear option. Alexander was so busy playing CEO, so consumed with planning his next vacation and picking out his new corner office furniture, that he never felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Not until the morning of the emergency board meeting. I'd called it for 8 a.m. on a Monday, using my authority as founder and major shareholder. Alexander tried to cancel it, told his assistant to ignore my request, but the board members knew who really built the company. When Margaret Wilson calls a meeting, you show up. I walked into that boardroom wearing my finest silk suit, Chanel, the deep navy one I'd worn when we went public in 1995. My pearls were perfectly positioned, my hair freshly done, my posture straight, and my mind sharper than it had been in years. The conference room went dead silent when I entered. Alexander was already seated at the head of the table, my seat, the chairman's seat. Victoria was there too, sitting in on board meetings now apparently, scrolling through her phone. The colour drained from Alexander's face when he saw me. He'd expected me to be at that assisted living facility by now, drugged up and compliant, signing over my power of attorney. "What are you doing here?" he said, standing up, trying to assert authority. "Mother, this is a closed board meeting. You're not well. You shouldn't be here. Sit down, Alexander," I said quietly, and something in my voice made him flinch. "That's my seat." He tried to have security escort me out, actually pulled out his phone to call them, shouting about my condition, about how I was confused and potentially dangerous. I just smiled and slid a manila folder across the mahogany table toward him. "The forensic audits," I said, "conducted by Morrison and Associates, the same firm that helped bring down Enron. They've been examining our books for the past 6 months at my request." Alexander's hand froze, reaching for his phone. "You'll find detailed documentation of $47 million in fraudulent transactions," I continued, my voice steady and cold. "Money stolen from employee pension funds, supplier, payments, and R&D budgets. Money that was used to fund private jets, designer handbags, and a lifestyle far beyond what your salary supports." I slid another folder toward him. Medical documentation from 3 independent neurologists, all confirming that I am in perfect cognitive health, no dementia, no decline, no confusion. Your neurologist friend, Dr. Patterson, is currently under investigation for insurance fraud and accepting bribes to falsify medical records. Victoria's phone clattered to the table. Several board members leaned forward, picking up the folders, reading. "But wait," I said, pulling out my phone. "There's more." I connected it to the conference room display system and played Luke's recording. Alexander's voice filled the room, drunk and arrogant, discussing how to gaslight the old bat, how to steal my shares, how to have me declared incompetent. The board members' faces went from shock to disgust. These were people who'd worked with me for decades, who'd built their careers at Wilson Enterprises, who respected what we'd built together. Then Eleanor Hartwell walked into the room. "Good morning, everyone," she said, taking a seat at the table like she owned the place. "For those who don't know me, I'm Eleanor Hartwell of Hartwell Capital. As of this morning, Margaret Wilson and I jointly control 51% of Wilson Enterprises' voting shares." She smiled at Alexander, and it was the smile of a shark who'd just spotted blood in the water. "We are here to announce Alexander Wilson's immediate termination as CEO for gross misconduct, embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Security has been instructed to escort him from the building. His company accounts, access cards, and privileges are revoked, effective immediately." The look of pure terror in Alexander's eyes was something I'll remember for the rest of my life. The golden boy, the heir apparent, the man who thought he could outsmart his own mother, realizing in one horrible moment that he'd lost everything. "You can't do this," he said, his voice rising to a shout. "I'm your son. This is my company." "No," I said, standing up and walking to the head of the table to my seat. "This is my company. I built it. I bled for it. I sacrificed everything for it. You were just supposed to protect it, to honor it, to lead it with integrity. Instead, you stole from it. You stole from the people who depend on us, who trust us." I leaned down, looking him directly in the eyes. "You forgot who taught you everything you know about business, Alexander. You forgot that I've been playing this game since before you were born. You thought I was weak because I'm old. But age isn't weakness. It's experience. It's patience. It's knowing exactly when to strike." Security entered the room then, two large men who'd been with the company for 20 years. "Escort Mr. Wilson and his wife from the building," I said. "They're no longer employed here." Victoria started crying, that Instagram-ready crying that looked pretty on camera, but there were no cameras here, and no one cared. "What about my things?" she sobbed. "My office? My accounts?" "You can collect your personal items under supervision," Eleanor said. "Your company credit cards have been cancelled. Your accounts frozen pending the investigation." As they were being led out, Alexander turned to me one last time. "Mum," he said, and for a second he sounded like my little boy again. "Please." I looked at him and felt nothing but disappointment. "The son I raised died the moment you decided to betray everything I taught you about loyalty and integrity," I said. "I don't know who you are anymore." The door closed behind them, and the room sat in stunned silence. But I wasn't done, not even close. I held a press conference that afternoon, right on the steps of Wilson Enterprises headquarters, with every major business news outlet in attendance. I told them everything, showed them everything, laid out the whole sordid story for the world to see. The embezzlement, the fraud, the attempt to have me declared incompetent to steal my shares. I revealed that I was restoring every stolen cent to the employees' pension funds out of my own personal accounts, $47 million, because the people who built this company deserved better than to have their retirements stolen by a spoiled trust fund baby. I announced new corporate governance policies, independent oversight of all executive compensation, mandatory ethics training, protection for whistleblowers. I turned my family's shame into a blueprint for reform. The authorities were waiting for them at their penthouse that evening. Alexander and Victoria were arrested on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The police seized Victoria's handbag collection as evidence, each bag tagged and catalogued, her precious Birkins becoming Exhibit A through Exhibit M in a federal fraud case. The photos of them being led away in handcuffs made the front page of every newspaper in the country. Victoria's Instagram was flooded with former followers calling her a thief and a fraud. The influencer who'd built her brand on luxury and aspiration became a cautionary tale about greed and entitlement. Today, I'm sitting in my new office, the corner office I'd given to Alexander, taking it back because I earned it. It overlooks the city, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the skyline I've watched transform over 4 decades in business. Luke is by my side, learning what it really means to lead with honor. He's my COO now, working 80-hour weeks, learning every aspect of the business from the ground up. He refused the executive salary, said he hadn't earned it yet. That's how I know he's different from his father. Alexander is serving 8 years in federal prison. I get letters from him sometimes, apologies that feel hollow, requests for money I ignore. He works in the prison laundry room, making 12 cents an hour, learning what it means to actually work for a living. Victoria's social circle vanished like smoke the moment the handcuffs went on. The influencer friends, the society ladies, the celebrities who'd posed with her at galas, they all disappeared. Last I heard, she's living in a studio apartment in Queens, working retail, trying to rebuild her life after serving 3 years. My siblings, Caroline called once, drunk, crying about how she didn't know, how she was sorry. I hung up on her. Robert sent a letter asking for a loan. I sent it back unopened. Diane tried to visit, claiming she'd only sold her shares because Eleanor pressured her. I had security turn her away. Some people think I'm too harsh, that family should forgive family, but they don't understand. This wasn't just about betraying me. It was about betraying every single person who worked for Wilson Enterprises, who depended on us, who trusted us with their futures. I didn't want revenge for cruelty's sake. I wanted justice to restore the balance they'd destroyed. My strength wasn't gone because of my age. It was just waiting, dormant, gathering evidence, preparing for the exact right moment to strike. They mistook patience for weakness, strategy for confusion, silence for surrender. A mother's love is infinite. I learned that when I held Alexander for the first time in the hospital, when I worked 3 jobs to give him opportunities I never had, when I built a company so he'd never know poverty. That love is still there, buried under layers of disappointment and betrayal. But it's there. But a founder's resolve? That's absolute. That's steel. That's 4 decades of fighting for every inch of ground, of refusing to be underestimated, of proving every single person who said a single mother couldn't build an empire completely and utterly wrong. They forgot who they were dealing with. They saw a 67-year-old woman and assumed that meant weak, confused, past her prime. They forgot that. I'm Margaret Wilson. I built this empire from nothing. I survived every attempt to destroy it. And I'll be damned if I let my own son be the one to tear it down. The pearls I wear every day? They're not just jewelry. They're armor. They're a reminder of who I am, what I've survived, what I've built. Thomas gave them to me when Wilson Enterprises hit our first $1 million in revenue. I wore them to our IPO. I wore them to his funeral. I wore them to Alexander's wedding. And I wore them the day I took my company back. If you liked this story, please hit that subscribe button. It's free, and it helps us keep making content like this. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. And if you've ever been underestimated because of your age or your gender or anything else, remember this: they're not seeing clearly, but you are, and that's your power. To hear the next story, click the box on the screen. Thanks for listening. And remember, never underestimate a woman who's been underestimated her whole life. We've had decades to perfect our aim.